But you look good.
Okay, I think we're good. We're good to go. Okay, thank you everybody so much for coming to Sofia Queer Forum 2018. The topic, as you might know already, is picked up by our two curators, Patrick Shabus and Mohamed Salemi, who we invited to work with this year for the show, and they picked a topic which is called Homeland for the Vagabond. And the general concept of which the two discussions that are happening right now today at Fabrika Avtonomia in Sofia is dealing with the topic of queer refugees in Europe, with a special focus on Eastern Europe, and to some extent trying to address what exactly is going on also in Bulgarian context, or how can we intellectualize that and think about problems of migration within the context of the last several years of international politics, the refugee crisis, etc., etc. And we were very curious to address this topic in artistic ways. So, as you know, Sofia Queer Forum is an arts event for the most part, and we always have a public program that includes discussions with artists, artist talks, more general discussions, and this is what's happening today. We have two discussions. They will be both introduced properly and moderated by one of our curators, Mohamed Salemi. He will moderate both events and will be in conversation in the first event, which is starting now, with two of our guests. To my right is Borjana Ventzislavova, who is a Bulgarian-Austrian identity artist. That a correct description, or more of an Austrian?
No.
Okay. Okay. Who is participating with a work in Sofia Queer Forum called Help, and Viron Erol Vert, again to my right. You will see these guys in a moment. Who is also one of the guests of the show, and he also has a piece featured in the general exhibition. And I think right now it's good if Mohamed jumps in and introduce a little bit the discussion and start the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stanimir, for your introduction. So, yes, so first of all, I wanted to thank Vladia from the Vasco Emanuilovia Gallery for hosting the show and really being great in accommodating the technical and political expectations of the show and really working with us. And if you have time, please go. If you haven't seen the show, please take your time to go see the show. I'm just going to briefly read the statement of the exhibition, because I think that will just set a good frame and remind everyone what this was about. The exhibition, as Stanimir mentioned, is co-curated by myself and my partner, Patrick Shabas, who's present, and he will be joining the next panel. So the exhibition, Homeland for Vagabond, will be focusing on the following questions. And you guys can take these questions also as the questions that you would answer. How are the concepts of queer and queer identity changing during the time of increasing austerity, deregulation, poverty, growing racism, nationalisms, including homonationalism, social segregation, and discrimination? So basically, what's happening to the queer identity under our current contemporary political conditions globally? And can these concepts, meaning the concepts of queer and queer identity, be rethought as part of a larger emancipatory social movements? Not just class-based, but also general human rights and general progressive movements that are happening locally in different places, but also globally. And can a new queer identity and discourse contribute to the collective and universal struggle for better life and equal political and social rights for all? Or should the queer identity remain limited to the queer categories' identitarian legacies from the 1990s? The queer refugees then are the other thing that will come up as so generally the queer identity, and secondary the queer refugee and migrant identity. The queer refugees are caught between a rock and a hard place, as their true position is neither fit into the imagination of the political left or right. Homeland for the Vagabond hopes to untangle the Gordian knot of belonging on the one side to a culture with whom one's sexuality is in conflict, and at the same time being perceived in the host country as an eternal other in the asylum-giving country. A contradictory double problem that queers who have been forced into exile share. So to go back to the question, let's start with you, Viron. And also Viron has to leave earlier because of catching a flight. So I think it's good to start with you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I'm not sure if you identify as a queer artist or not, or if that enters the picture at all or not. But it would be interesting to hear your opinion about the question, not only as a queer artist or a queer person, but in general as someone who observes the society, because that's what artists do. Yeah. What do you think is happening to queer identity under these current conditions, basically since 2014, 15, as we enter this new round of rise of nationalism, but then with the election of Trump, it got like more official since the only superpower went towards that, and then after that, it's been just like streamrolling one country after another. The last one being Brazil, picking a very ultra-nationalist and decidedly and vocally anti-queer politician to represent the country.
Hello. Hi. I think that, I don't know how to start. I think that, in my opinion, first of all, I don't identify myself or my work only as a queer position or queer artist. But this means also that I living in Berlin, I always felt that I don't have to name it especially. So for me, it's a normal. It's normal, like it's inside the society to be gay or to be queer. So I was not thinking that I have to separate it or to see it only from that perspective. I think that if you're an artist or you in any kind of work, whatever you do, and you are gay or you're hetero, whatever you are, you bring this element also inside your work, if you want or not. So you cannot separate it. So I cannot say that I'm a queer artist or not. I am an artist, and that I am, and what is my work is inside that, of course. That as first. I think.
So what about in relation to contemporary political conditions?
Yeah, I think it is that we are in a very problematic situation, in my opinion, personally, because to be queer, to be out of the norm, let's say, is getting much more. You are on the play field right now. So I think more and more, how you mentioned before, countries or societies or ideas in certain countries are starting to use it a kind of ball, like and playing how far they can go or how far they can influence it. And with this item, they can show if you are against or for an idea or a concept, like being democratic or left or right or whatever possibilities we have. So on one side, living in Berlin, for example, we have a situation where it's very open and very involved, let's say, in everyday life. But if I see, for example, as I'm coming from Turkey and Greece, you see also that it's there also very much in a different position, and it's not, and it's changing also very much to another place. So I think we have both situations, and the problem is that being queer, whatever it is, if you're gay, lesbian, or trans, you are exactly in the middle of it, and I think this is the dangerous moment.
Borjana, do you want me to re-articulate the question, or you have it in mind already?
Well, I think I have it in my mind, and I can't identify it all with queer identity, or I can't identify with as a queer artist because I'm not, and also I haven't, as an artist, I don't have a praxis working with queer refugee migrants, but I do have praxis working with migrants, and actually a long praxis, because between 2000 and maybe The last project I was doing was 2012 or 13. That was basically one of my main subjects I was dealing with in my praxis. From there, I'm also as a migrant in, between Bulgaria and Austria for the last 22 years. I had to face the situation myself, but also I was working for a long time with refugees and also undermined refugees on different projects. So I can talk particularly about issues and problematics in the queer scene, but maybe more general from the migrant perspective. But of course, what you see nowadays, especially with the migrant crisis, on the other hand, I totally can imagine that for queer people, it's probably much more difficult and dangerous because they have to face two ways of exclusion from society, being on one hand refugees or migrants, on the other hand also being whatever it is, queer people, lesbian, gay, transgender. So I totally can see that this is something that it's kind of like a much bigger struggle and much more problematic to find a way through society and to find a way also to get some kind of voice, even if you want to say nowadays, especially, I don't know, I see like in Bulgaria, I'm totally happy and thank you so much to invite me to be part of the Sofia Queer Forum. It's also the first time that I'm participating in the Queer Forum. I think it's the 6th issue. I haven't been also in Sofia the last 6 years when it was happening, and but I somehow read about it and watched also online some discussions. So I have the feeling also that it's getting smaller in a way. So I don't know if this is something maybe specific about this year, but I have the feeling that like the exhibitions and the discussions the previous years were maybe, I don't know if I'm right. So yeah. Okay, so it's not something that is going. I hope it, it's not, I was thinking, okay, why is that, if that's the case, is that something that reflects as well the situation in political context, or is just maybe something?
I want to pick up, go ahead.
No, but yeah.
I want to pick up something from your response,
Yeah.
Viron, and because it was also on my mind to talk about it, which is the complexity of the situation and what makes it different than the past in a way, for me at least. And I identify as queer, not necessarily through my work, so it's not like my art when I produce art or when I curate is necessarily like focuses on queer issues. But I identify as a queer person publicly, and that's just the way it is. And it comes with certain sacrifices. For instance, I can't travel back to Iran because I'm publicly declared myself and put myself in a service of this cause sometimes, both in Farsi language and in English. But for me, what I notice is that queer people in the last little while have been utilized both by the left and the right in their political game.
Yeah.
So what happens is, now that social democrats and the liberals are in trouble, they want to rush the women and minorities and the queer people to the front and basically tell them, get involved because this is your fight, because if the fascists come to power, you are the first person to lose the rights and everything that you've been granted. From the other hand, our participation in politics is utilized by the right wing to say, oh, see, the gender people are all over. This is exactly why we have to defeat the left, because the left has been putting these people in charge and giving a lot of voice to these people.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? So it's like, So it's like your participation is required, but at the same time, your participation is utilized by the other side against your very self. So this is, to me, what is very unique about the situation we face today, right? Is like, how do I actually articulate my political involvement, being aware of the fact that I'm used as a human shield by those who basically have run our political system to the ground, basically, whether social democrat or liberal parties who have been in charge of like the countries in which being homosexual has been okay or tolerated. And then how am I going to adjust my participation so my participation does not get utilized against my very self, and then also against the cause of the left, democracy, human rights, and all that, right? It's a very, very difficult situation for queers, but also queer cultural producers, because they usually have a larger voice than an average queer person, right? So a perfect example of that, I just like saw that in a newspaper today, was that a few days ago, it was a very like sinister campaign by obviously like nationalists in Canada to fax and poster a lot of flyers around the university speaking about, it says, it is okay to be white. That's it. It's a sheet of white paper that it says, it is okay to be white. And then students went to the classrooms and hallways, and the offices of gender studies, the offices of queer community groups on a campus, everyone received this fax. It's a simple thing, right? So what happened was there was this reaction by the community and professors. Everybody condemned it. Everybody kind of used it as a rallying ground against nationalism. What happened was like these responses were utilized again, saying like, see, it's all about the hate for white people, because the paper doesn't actually say anything offensive. So it was totally a trap.
Absolutely.
A sort of like a not really offensive, but really sinister statement was put out there as a trap to get all the left and the people on the right side of the argument all excited. And then you could tell that this was done that way, because you could see thousands of comments on all media of newspaper. So then the very same people who organized this came and say, see, you hate all white people, because see, actually the paper doesn't say anything bad. It just says white people are okay. What would you say if we said trans people are okay? You would have never done that. What would you say if we said lesbians are okay? So you know what I mean? So that's what I mean by like what a difficult position we're in terms of like adjusting our behavior and attitude to this reality that like everyone's very like aware of the map, everyone's aware of reactions, and it's basically like a war game, or you know what I mean? It's a game theory needed here, because without having an idea of like how your statement or your action will influence the other side, and then what they would do, and then what you have to prepare yourself to do, you basically your very clear and sweet and innocent intentions to support a progressive cause can totally actually be used and utilized against yourself. So that's really, so I don't know, maybe it's too much of a complex question, but how do you think we can respond to this? And also we can open it maybe later to the public to ask question of like this is really what we meant when we said like what is happening to the queer identity, and what is the role of queer cultural production in this particular time. So I just wanted to like draw a picture of what I mean by this particular time, and this is this particularity that I hope, and for us people who organize the exhibition, for us the sort of like solution is to rather than further and further specializing this particularity, is to further and further try to link it to larger emancipatory movements and larger emancipatory demands or larger issues that then allow us to actually not be always at the forefront of this left versus right fight. By making our demands part of a larger set of demands that belong not just to queer people, but also not just to the, say, queer immigrants, but also to queer people, and not just to the queer people, but to all the like underclass and working class and youth and all sorts of stuff. But this is a place to debate this and see if this is a good idea at all, or there's other ways to sort of like act and activate our political agency in such a particular time.
Okay, now first of I have to digest what you said, actually, to be honest, because it was like 8 minutes, very intense and very important what you said. At the end of the day, is that what I said in the beginning also, that I think that you, that we or you, like as being queer or gay, you getting this playground, and you get actually the figure on the field or on the billiard table. Yeah, your billiard table. Yeah. And you are like actually on you. They play if they lose or if they go back or forth or left or right. So I think it's in general. I don't know how to respond to that. I think I try not to. I'm not hiding it, but I'm also not. How can I say it? I don't want to say it wrong. I don't want to push it. Like, I don't hide it, but I also see it naturally involved in my works in general. If I do the work that I showed now with you or the other works too, I think you understand that there is a different view on society because you are different by nature in the main society. So you have a different view on society. So I think the only thing that we can do is to show this different point of view and to try to reach the people by it. Also in the content, how the work, like I talk now as an artist, of course, and about the projects that I do. So I try to involve it in the design or in the question or in the topic, so that that maybe the audience have the chance that is not into this, not in the queer community or that has anything to do with it. So also more maybe an issue with it or a fear because they are so away from it, so they don't understand it emotionally what it is. So yeah, the only thing is like to develop your work and to go forward. I don't know if it's a good question and if it's intelligent, but it's the most honest one, I think.
Do you have something to say?
No, I mean, like this question, it's again for me is kind of like from the very Western perspective that you're defining, because I think even also like speaking as Bulgarian, so I'm not so much into, you know, like the community here and so on, and I don't know so much about it, but what I'm like is a general citizen, kind of like observing, you know, we are the only one country which didn't ratify accept the Istanbul Convention. So
could you please talk about Istanbul Convention, because people who might listen to this later or are live right now, which I think there's at least, yeah, there are a few viewers watching. Explain what Istanbul Convention was. It's a very important issue in Bulgaria.
It's not only in Bulgaria, because it's a European convention basically about domestic violence. And I don't know exactly, maybe in discussion afterwards you can talk a little bit more about it, because there are some other speakers from Bulgaria who probably are much more familiar with the subject, but I don't know exactly why it became so much about the third gender in Bulgaria, the discussion, because the convention is about domestic violence. And it's European convention. It's not something specifically about Bulgaria, but Bulgaria was the only one country which didn't ratify the convention. So, and as I found out yesterday, I don't know if it's true because I didn't have the chance to read the news, but it's not. Okay, so it was a fake news, or what was it? It was that actually, if it's not consensus, that is not going to be working for the whole European Union. So it's a fake news, okay?
Around the Europe working.
Yeah, so it's not like if Bulgaria doesn't ratify it, it will fall apart. It just doesn't work in Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm saying it loud because to get it like...
What is being about the fake news, not
mm-hmm. But yeah, so talking about, you know, like queer issues in I think Bulgaria, there is a totally different perspective, because I don't think it's something normal for Bulgaria, for queer people in Bulgaria actually to see it as a part of the
struggle for their rights.
So it's a totally different discussion, and I hope you know, like you're gonna maybe go on about this a bit later in the second part. Yeah, so I just when I was like listening to. So
question is,
guys,
as a cultural producer, do you feel the urge to do to make your work more socially engaged and political, or less, or you just doesn't matter. You're just going to keep doing what you did as before?
I mean, to be honest, as I mentioned before, I was working very focused on the subject of migration because I had the need to work on that subject, and it was for me, like for example, like 15 years ago, it was very underrepresented also in the media, and it was kind of something that I had the feeling, okay, you know, I have to, I was, for my personal background and perspective, I was interested to find out more, of course, and to understand more and to produce work about, I mean, I've done work with women. I was working with women in trafficking from former Eastern Europe in Western Europe. So I was working also with under-minority migrants coming from Afghanistan, Rwanda. I'm talking about like 2000,
yes.
2001 and so on. So that was kind of like a long time when I developed this practice, but basically since the crisis started, and somehow also stepped back in a way, because at that moment I felt already that, okay, it's already in front, it's on your TV, on your screen, it's in front of your door, so it's everybody's responsibility somehow. Of course, my works continue to be social and political engaged and deal with subjects which I see as important, but in a way also I started in my practice, like my recent practice the last couple of years, to reflect much more also on history and on past, what happened actually in this kind of like post-communist period for myself, and also like became much more interested in this Eastern-Western discourse, and kind of step back from the migration team in a way, because I think it's like everybody's responsibility, and everybody nowadays can do something about it. So it's not anymore the, you know, like the role of the artist to be the messenger, and to which I see in a way myself as an artist. But so it's also for me kind of interesting to see that kind of naturally I you know, like in a way I step back.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you the question, but also like bring up something that me and Patrick spoke about at one of the interviews, which is like sort of like parallel to the rise of the right on nationalism worldwide. There's been this this shift of attention in the curatorial world to try to curate more political works that deal with the question of coloniality, deal with the question of feminism, and deal with the question of queer again. Like sort of like to us who professionally are engaged in the art world, it kind of feels like a retro 1990s, because the content of these discourses have not like changed that much. It's just that is a return to those questions, right? Yeah. So basically, curators have already shown what they're doing. They're increasing their engagement with these issues in the hope of sort of like some kind of an impact. So as an artist, how do you feel? Do you feel the need to engage more? And I got a proper answer from you. So I'm just like asking the same question from Viron. Do you feel the urge to make more work in these directions of social engagement and political engagement, or for you it's like that thing is just off and you're just going to do what you always did? And if you're interested in something, or if your work be interpreted that way, you allow it to happen, and if not, so be it.
No, I think for sure that it's important to do more projects in that direction, let's say. I think I ask myself more in which way we're going to do it. I think I feel that there's a big fashion that you told before. Also, when you live in Berlin, there's a big fashion to go on these topics. But I always feel when I see and I look to the curators, not all, of course, but some, that they use also this kind of fashion also to I don't know, also like to be update or to be fashionable or to be on the peak on what they now have to talk about. And at that moment, there's a problem that actually the reason for doing these projects are getting to the back, and the content is going to the back, and it's more important to put these projects on your Vita or on the next talk, and to be with the right people. and on the right exhibition or panel or something. I think you see it also in the way how they create the exhibitions. That means maybe for the 5 curators and the 10 artists that are studied and know this knowledge by their PhD in university and all this stuff, they understand it, and that's fine. But I mean, these people already know these things. For me, it's more important that the person from the street and the neighbor and the old lady from the shop understands this issue. So, and I think this is much more important to reach these people. So in my opinion, I found it always very problematic that they have this very high standard theoretical research. It's all fine, but in my guys, you don't reach the people with that. You don't reach the norm audience with it. And in my opinion, to be like me personally, I try to reach
a broader audience.
A broader, but means broad. I try to reach at least different layers of audience. If it's broad or not, I cannot say, because I don't push the numbers, or I cannot push them to come more or less. But I try to reach with my artistic expression, how you call it, the people that maybe are not having a PhD and studied for 5 years curatorship or art. You know, I think this is actually the problem. So it's not about the question if you have to do it or not, or if you make it less or more. It's more about how you bring it to the people. And if you have like this kind of exhibitions where you have, I don't know, 10 tons of theoretical texts that maybe are the curators are very happy to exchange and to measure the knowledge. That is a big problem in my opinion. Yeah, super. You can wank on it. It's super nice. Masturbate on it. But at the end of the day, you don't reach the people that have to know it. Because you and me, we know already the stories, but the other person don't. And it's about to tell them. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
So,
yeah, totally.
You might just say, okay, yeah.
So you guys were present yesterday in the curator tour, right?
Yeah.
And you sort of heard us or frame your work, right? And I'm gonna just like briefly bring up some of the points that I brought up. Me and Patrick brought up about the works in the exhibition. About Viron, your work, not only your work really is basically it's beautiful in so many different ways. But one of the reasons why we were attracted to it for the exhibition was that the fact that the way you use these materials to build your sculpture totally like synthesizes so many of these different ideas into one. So you have the leather sling, you have the prayer mat, you have the flying carpet, you have it shows how in basically inseparability of, say, the migrant issue from the queer issue. It also shows the inseparability of spirituality from queer identity and queer sex in a way, because it's actually like a sex toy, right? Yeah, and it kind of poetically literally creates new metaphors by putting this material together. You know what I mean? Like, and also because I'm involved in the social media, and I posted the picture of it to my social media, and of course this piece had been shown a couple of times before, because I saw it in Berlin in your Berlin solo exhibition, and that's where I fell in love with it. But it was interesting to see people's reaction to it in the comment section, and how they read it and looked at it. It has this power. This is actually how new meaning is created. When you bring things, metaphors are like transport devices, right? Like when you bring things that normally, don't go, a prayer mat and a leather sling, you know what I mean? Don't normally go together, but you somehow put them together. It's not offensive, even though one thing, oh my God, it could be offensive, but actually it's not offensive. It's a beautiful thing. And as those of you who are there know, it's not actually a sling, because it's not really a functioning sling, it's a conceptual sling.
Yeah.
So I don't know, how did you feel about that characterization? And then we'll go over yours, because I really want this to be a dialogue, because yesterday we said you guys don't talk, so we talk tomorrow. So I thought of asking you about the way I read it, and what do you think about the reading that the curators had of your work? If you can add to it, or
Yeah.
maybe challenge it and say, no, you're
No,
wrong.
I mean, first of all, when you make a work, me at least, I never think what they're gonna. I mean, you cannot influence the view or the point of view that somebody that is neutral, let's say, on the work that you do. On the other side, whatever work you do, this or also another work, I think that's for you the same. It's always involved with your own emotions or with your own story, also in a way. And
so maybe you want to speak about and add to the way I read it. Like, what is your reading?
Okay. Like, yeah. First of all, I wanted to say that, of course, I appreciate very much how I read it. Like, you asked me about like how this work came out, also in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, also this work was. I was invited for a show in the Museum in Berlin, and it was G4 Migrate. It was about the question, how I understood the question about migration and sexuality, and the different point of views of sexuality also. So me coming from different cultures, like I live and born and raised in Germany, but I have also, my parents are from Istanbul and Athens and live with Syrian border, Armenia. So it's a big mix of different layers and cultures. And I wanted to show with this work that you have different perspective on sexuality. For me, in the Western world, sexuality is much more categorized and named and separated and boxed. In a way, so you are like, okay, you are active, passive, or you are like into a certain fetish, or you like a certain material, or leather, or rubber, or a certain practice, and so it's very clear. It identified each section, let's say, and this also symbolized for me the way how the Western world sees also maybe practice sexuality in a way. And the other part, in this case, it is the carpet. First of all, the carpet is a piece of family fundus that I found when we closed the house in Istanbul. So it has also a link personally to my family. And I collect all these items and had them for many years in my storage. And then
so it's correct to assume you cut the leather to the size of the layer,
of course,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So the leather
Sure. The carpet was before there. And also, how you said before, normally a sling is for one person. I made it like as a mirror because I wanted also to show the reflection that we have while having, like living out our sexuality, but also when you come from different cultures, you have, of course, also the different point of views in you. And that means also that you are having an opposite also. Also fetishes that you have, like a sling is a proto furniture, let's say, for a fetish, is also very much, each fetish is also very much linked to yourself. Even you have another one or more people that you practice, whatever you practice or like, it's already also a stimulation that has to do with your own soul and your own body. Yeah? So I wanted to show this also, of course, in that. Yeah? So for me, to finish this is that the carpet and the pattern and the color was for me symbolizing also the way how I see that the Orient world, let's say, or the Mediterranean part that I have also my family is maybe describing the way of sexuality. So it's not categorized, but you have more color and more pattern. This is also a kind of categorization too, in a way, but it's different from the form. So I wanted to put actually the form of the Western culture and the pattern and the colors from the Orient culture together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Borjana, let's pose the same question to you. Should I repeat?
No,
you were there for our interpretation, right? And
so basically, the work here is another piece of mine which transformed through the years. Firstly, I created this piece in 2013 for an exhibition which was curated by Boris Kostadinov and happened in a gallery in New York, in the Radiator Gallery. And the subject of the exhibition was, in a way, how technology nowadays impacts society. And So I had basically, maybe for those of you who didn't see the exhibition yet, do we have those newspapers here?
Yes, they can pick it up.
So there is basically in this exhibition I have a work which is a mirrored box with the walls of the box are mirrors, and inside the box there is a pile of desert sand, and on top of it there is a neon sign which says help. Help. So basically the word help is reflected, and also the sand is reflected into those mirrors, and you became kind of like an echo of the help. The first time when I showed this work in New York, it was not in the box, it was just the pile of sand like installed on the floor of the exhibition space, and the neon sign was in the sand. And then later on, I decided to create this mirror box because somehow I didn't have the feeling that the work is finished to me, and I also wanted to put it somehow much more in nowadays context. So the help.
Sorry, was the mirror there or no mirror?
The first time it was the
no
first time when I showed the work, there was no mirror. It was a pile of sand, and it was just the neon sign. And then later on, showing the work in Vienna, so I decided to put the whole the sand and the neon sign in the mirror, which totally changed the work. Basically, I mean, you know, like the help statement and the desert sand, which were kind of very important elements to the work, stayed there, but also it became kind of different dimension to the reflection of the word, and the reflection, this kind of like endless sand, which is repeating somewhere in the
what we liked about it also was the fact that it was sort of like what Viron was saying, that like it's a call for help, right, rising out of sand, but then when the viewer looks at it, they see themselves in a mirror also, so it kind of like creates this like reflection of like who is asking for help, because it looks like a, I don't know, it looks like it's actually who needs the help. Is it a call for help from the other, or is it a call for help from the person who's making this self-reflection, which is like thinking about themselves? So that to us was important because it would change the question of like, do queer migrants need help? And by helping them, you're actually helping yourself.
I totally actually was interested. I never thought about this reading that you had on my work, and I was, to be honest, very happy about it because, as I said before, the work was created in a different context, and it was more about technology and the impact of technology on our Earth in general. And so for me, back then, that was the concept that I wanted to create some kind of post-apocalyptic scenario where you have this deserted place, and then you have the call from not
humans, but nature itself.
For help, which has much more brighter and wider view on the work. And you know, like what I like also about your reading is that it's, you know, as an artist, I'm always very happy when after the work is finished, it takes its own life in a way. So it could work also in a different context and in different, and it's so open that it could also have so many different meanings. And I never thought about for example, what you said yesterday about the desert sand, and you know, like connecting it to, for example,
it's like sand is stereotypically linked to the Middle Eastern people, and then actually sand is in the slur words, English slur words for people from the Middle East. So to take this work that you say was produced mostly having like ideas of Anthropocene and post-Anthropocene in mind, and placing it in an exhibition that's trying to reflect on the question of queer and migrant queer identity, it kind of completely changes that, right? And especially because there are these links, we first thought like, okay, maybe this is too much because like it's so obvious that sand people are calling for help. But we also thought like maybe this is the risk to take, to kind of like actually go with this and say, okay, fine, yes, it is actually a call for help, from the people in the Middle East. But if you look at it, you're going to see yourself in it.
Exactly, yeah. And that's also, you know, this kind of like ambivalent or just like the duality in the work as well, because also we as a, you know, like white European or
need help as much, if not more.
We need much more help actually to get this understanding and to make the change in a way in ourselves as well. So
based on the time we have, and especially because you have to get going, maybe we should just open it up for some questions, like 10 minutes, few questions, and then we can take a break, and then the second panel will happen after 15 minutes. So if anybody wants to ask a question or have something, please stand up here, because our PA system somehow stopped working in the middle of setup. So we just are like limited to the microphone that's on the laptop. So if you guys have any question, please come forth and engage the artists. Yes, maybe come sit here.
Or we can repeat the question.
Yeah, actually come back. Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask your question. I mean, your voice is more important than your face, but yeah.
It's just a comment in relation to your piece.
Yeah.
I had seen it a lot on most social media, but in other places. And I think that there was this thing that took me back about it, which is a kind of a sense of like domesticity.
Yeah.
With the carpet and the sling, a kind of a sense of like queer domesticity. Maybe.
Yeah.
And home, a sense of home, which I then in the context of this exhibition, actually, I thought was quite interesting to think about that idea of queer home and queer belonging in the context of migration. And I was wondering if it's
No, I like what you said, absolutely. This is I'm sure it is
Great reading.
It's a great reading, first of all. Thank you for that. This is always the same in any kind of work you do, that you, of course, have maybe layers that are clear, and other layers are more undercover. And so, what I want to say, yeah, sure, it is like that. Like, of course, it's like that. Of course, like when you say about, let me think. I have to think for a minute. Of course, it means also like this question of having a home, or to get somewhere home. Like a carpet is the first. Let's say I have made a research about carpet, and it's the first architectural building. Let's say before any kind of house, maybe there were already a kind of carpet where the people could sit on or make a tent out of it or something. So I think for sure this is also in the work.
And the sling is the second.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, of course, more established, more maybe, let's say, it's a more established one. But it's not only because you said queer. In my opinion, I also know a lot of heterosexual couples and people that use a sling too.
Who are they?
I can tell you when we are. So it's not in my opinion, this is also like something that we don't have to, because I think there's a big difference. I think queer people talk more openly about these things. So everybody thinks always it's a queer thing, fetishes. But to be honest, working so long time in nightlife, fetish, you have also a lot in the heterosexual scene too. But they don't talk about it. Because they don't have to talk about it, because their sexuality is not questioned in general in society, because they are in the norm more, so they can do it without talking about it. Yeah, that's also something.
Well, what's interesting about your reading is that for a lot of us, sling is actually a social technology, because you don't have it in a home necessarily unless you're hardcore into it, right?
Yeah.
Sling is something you see in a bathhouse or in a fetish space, right?
Yeah.
But the carpet is actually what kind of like shows. Yeah, I don't know many people who have slings at home. Maybe one person I've encountered in my entire life who had a personal sling. But the carpet is definitely like what you were saying. So Joao's reading is very nice, because by like putting them together, you kind of like show how a queer space can be a home.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't even question it though.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm not going to get back into your background, but like as people who've been around like the scene, for a lot of people, the spaces that host this technology are like home, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
So the carpet make it very like explicit.
Yeah, I think maybe the carpet is a link to everyday life, and it's a kind of like, let's say, even a banal, like what I don't know what to say in English, but a kind of really like basic piece for furnituring or designing your place where you live, like your social space or your house or where your flat or something. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, please come closer, because
Thanks.
because we wanted to get recorded well.
Yeah, but
that's all.
Also,
We can repeat the
we
question.
can
Yes.
repeat it.
The question is to you.
Okay, I'll try to repeat.
The position you kind of, the starting question, the starting point towards all the discussion about this middle position, about this political usage of the queer issues which we face nowadays, and about your solution for the exhibition. So starting from there, do you think that not only queer issue can relate to, let's say, broader topics in order to avoid this overusage and political exploitation of the topic, but also can use this politicized position to politicize other issues that are not so, that doesn't have this political access or political platform or this stamp which queer issues have today. Like, for example, I can remember that Queer Forum several years ago. The situation in Bulgaria was completely different, and everything was stuck to the problem of identity, more or less. And identity is a very rigid ground. So now the ground is much more fruitful also, not only for the queer topic to be exploited, but also to be in the center of a political debate which the queer perspective can exploit itself. Do you think that this is possible?
Yes, but it will be good if you give us one example of these type of issues that are not politicized or like are not seen in this light that can also.
For example, the family. The queer issue politicized the whole concept of the family, even for heterosexual people. Like what it is, the family today. And I do believe that in Bulgaria, I'm not sure, of course, I didn't research the topic, but I do believe that the Istanbul Convention, through the gender, politicized also the question of the family. And this is something very interesting. And for example, the following questions about domestic violence, about women, about the patriarchal family, they kind of continued the debate on gender, on the third sex, which actually was a pure propaganda related to the public reading of Istanbul Convention.
I can't see any other example, but I think in the context of the show, you can say like immigration could be one, right? Like, so because if you're talking about queer migrants, you basically are talking about the whole question of migration. But I don't think from what I've picked up throughout the research for the exhibition and visiting Bulgaria twice, I don't think the question of migration has been really picked up or linked the way you pointed out how family has been linked and picked up. And I think maybe in the second panel, which is less about the art show and more about the theme of the show, maybe we can like discuss this because I have some ideas, but I'm trying to save it for the second panel. Yes. Okay. Yes, if you can come forth, because your voice. Yeah, but you know what happens? It echoes and it doesn't get recorded. But it's fine because in the answer, people can find a question, maybe. Go ahead.
I saw this. And it was really fascinating to know. We were speaking just minutes ago about sex. Why? I don't, but I don't care about this identification. I also have to be since I don't care about the queer gay, lesbian, it's really very superficial for me. But I care when you speak about sex because I think it's something about everybody. We want everybody. And I do not agree when you say yeah because hetero people doesn't speak. I think it's more that not like that we don't want to speak and we cannot speak. It's
No,
more,
that's what I didn't say also.
sorry?
So that we
No,
don't
this-
have the need
No,
to
no,
speak about
I
it.
didn't say that. I said that heterosexual don't have to speak about it because they don't have to identify or explain themselves. When you're queer, you have to explain yourself much more because you're different than the norm.
But why you have to, my question is, why you have to express yourself with sex? Because it's a totally universal thing that for me it doesn't make you different from me.
Yeah, but no, but you're right. Absolutely, no, this is right.
And for me it's very, very superficial, very.
Yeah, no, but in this you're also, yeah.
We can make a joke about that, and it's very funny, and they participate in the joke.
Yeah,
But
it's also what you say. I
it's really
understand.
big for you.
No,
That's
but-
my point.
Yeah,
Okay.
but what I want, yeah.
The sex, the topic, sex living things.
Yeah, but you're right in that. So you want to talk?
May I?
Yeah, Zach has a few words.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think a great deal of it has to do with having to explain your sexuality or your identity, but also just thinking about it historically, a lot of queer people or alternative sex roles were mainly in these sort of places where sex fetishes would happen. You know what I mean? So it's not like it's
I can give you an example. Very
yeah, well, like the gay.
history is full of people.
Yeah,
gay,
so-
lesbian, Julius Caesar, that everybody
Yeah.
was thinking that the great imperator
Well, so
was gay, was totally, but was accepted
Yeah.
for everybody. In the Roman Empire, the gay lesbian was really a way of living, but not because of the sex, because of the personality that can express itself.
yeah.
But not
Okay,
in
go on, Zach.
But not in the Christian time after. Maybe
Yeah.
in the Christian, maybe
Yeah,
the church.
Christian and Paul's Enlightenment, if you follow Foucault.
Ja, claro. There's so much. Ja, klar.
Okay.
Ja, klar.
Yeah.
Let-
Because it's boring after one time, two times,
Well,
two times.
sex is not boring, but let
No, but what I want to say, I understand you totally. I think also, but I wanted to say is like, of course, this work now precisely it looks like it's linked, so it's linked to a sex topic. But if you see other works also, like from me or maybe from other people, it's not only. I think also it's very dangerous to minimalize your point of view or your sex only on the sexual element. You can also make a gay or queer work that has anything to do if you are now like to have a certain sex practice or not. This is what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Yeah, but
you know?
very often, I have a lot of friends, I'm an artist since a long time.
Yeah.
In this community, and I'm really trusting and support them. But at the same time, I'm very criticize a lot the way you are speaking about sex, because it's like a boomerang. After your identification is just with sex.
Yeah.
Just people
I just want Zach to finish what he was saying, if you don't mind.
sorry.
Well, yeah. So I guess I was thinking more of like a modern historical lens that like a lot of these activities were constrained to like certain, businesses that like allowed these sort of sexual interactions to happen. And so that became like the bathhouse a very like social meeting place, and really the only first time that you would ever meet someone who was also gay or queer or whatever was through these sexual encounters. So that's why it's kind of this very crucial element in queer discourse, because that was like one of the only ways to like meet people. And then how you're kind of saying that it's like this boomerang and that it is, getting old and stuff like that. Like I do agree with that a lot, but also at least where I'm from in the United States, the queer movement and the LGBTQ movement has become very homogenized and very public and very daytime would be the word. Like it's very acceptable now, and you see it everywhere, and it's kind of becoming this
clean, sanitized,
yeah, it's becoming,
asexual subject. So actually, for us, if I'm continuing on what you're saying,
especially for me, like being younger, like I actually miss that idea of the seediness of queerness, or the back doors, or the weird, you know what I mean? Like I don't have any connection to that.
For us, the critique of gender discourse for us, and actually it came up in one of the interviews we gave here, is that for us, sex, the relationship between sex and gender is a relationship between economy and culture in the old Marxian way, right? So it's based on superstructure, right? So as this move towards like post-structuralism and postmodernism that kind of like rejected Marx's idea that there's a base and superstructure, came along with like the sort of like the replacement of like the discourse around sex with the discourse around gender. And then sort of gender as this gender, I mean, gender is very important, don't get me wrong. It's like saying like culture is very important, of course, right? But what makes gender very important is actually sort of like sometimes it is the sexual content there, sexual activity there. And for us, this is very important to sort of like, for us, it's a return of sex. It's like trying to put sex back into gender, because especially in America and in England, in America, let me just finish my sentence. In America and in England, with the acceptance, as Zach was saying, part of the price of the acceptance was to tuck the sex away. And as if gender is just like a daytime performance you do at work or in subway, right? And it has no sexual content. So for me and Patrick, it was really important to have like these two works, yours and also more explicit Bruce's film, that actually put the sex back into the question of gender. To remind people that a lot of the issues that the right has, and a lot of the problems that the conservatives and religious people have with the genders actually is a way of like not talking about sex. It's actually about sex. So
yeah, this is exactly actually this hetero-white perspective, you know. I don't have anything against gay people, but why they have to expose it in the public, you know. I see somehow of parallels.
Just not the good way to communicate your point of sex. To be a gay or lesbian after you test yourself just about the sex. It's not. It's very superficial.
But why superficial? I can't understand why superficial.
So let's just like.
Because me personally, I see. I make an example. The gay and lesbian start was the first movement that started about movement of peace. You know, the rainbow. And that was wonderful. We were the first. And for me, that is much more important that you push in that way the society to make peace, not war. And it was wonderful because I participated a lot of times in the
gay pride.
Gay pride. That was the main part of the gay pride for me. To say, yes, I support you because you are the first that support the peace of the world. And it's much more important that say yes, we can make sex, we have to speak sex. Okay. I think that it's very superficial.
So I think somebody else maybe want to ask a question or maybe respond to this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Like I don't agree, because I think like sex is like so tied up with power relations, whether it's gender and like feminist issues or whether it's LGBTQ issues. It's like sex is power, and it's like so like, yeah, you said it's like boring, like everyone does it, but like also it's the reason why people are migrating like places and like how they can apply for asylum. And no matter how problematic that is, that's still kind of at the core of it. Or like in American politics, like sex is like so important in terms of the conversations that are going on in terms of gendered violence. And like even the Istanbul Convention, like gender violence is a sex issue, and like sex is like power and violence, and that's like a structure that's being repeated. And like, so saying that like the more productive parts of like gay culture is like creating equality and like rainbow, like that is like a way of dealing with like the power imbalance and the violence of sexuality, and like how sex can be like a playground to not have that kind of occur outside of it in the political, but there is no way of like separating, I think, like sex from politics, because it's like the first, like, you know, if we're thinking about like a Christian history, like marriage is this like binding of like sexuality through property. And so I don't see how it becomes boring or like peaceful.
But I think I understand also what she wants to say, maybe in the way of like that when you said it's boring or it's superficial, I think the problem that you have in the scene, let's say, that I also criticize as a gay person, is that they minimalize everything on that issue only. So I have really a problem. I worked very long time in nightlife in Berlin. I really for over 20 years, and I saw so different party develops and scenes and people that is going. Huh? Yeah, it's not important the name now, but
well, it is, because you know what I mean. It's part of your social observation. So I'm just gonna say it, if you don't mind. From the very beginning, before even this like very like iconic nightclub in the world, because now it has a status of a museum, Viron has been involved in the organization and the work around this very, very important, both a nightclub and also a sex space in Berlin, which is basically the sister and brother Berghain and laboratory, right? And I mean, you guys must have heard about Berghain, right? So Viron has worked in the establishment, has seen generation of young and club kids, homosexuals, lesbians, trans people come and party, whether upstairs in a nightclub or downstairs in the fetish club. So he has a very like broad view of this that actually sometimes is seen in his work or sort of like informs his work. So I think he has a lot to say about this actually, because of this particular vantage point that he's had as someone who's worked for a long time, since late 90s. I mean, before Berghain was at its new location, which has been there since 2005, Viron has been involved with the people and has worked at that establishment. So he's got a very good bird's eye view of this whole phenomenon unfolding to this point where, as you said right now, is very superficialized, right? And how like it's just focused sex for the sake of sex, right?
Yeah, I wanted to say that actually, yeah, I think that I wanted to say from the beginning that I also criticize in the certain scenes that the issue to be gay or lesbian or trans is mostly always talked over the practice, how you make sex. But of course, there are also a lot of other elements. But I want to say there are a lot of other ways to where it's involved. But at the end of the day, they all come to the moment how you like to have sex. Like maybe your point of view or the way how you see the world or how you see a society, how you see the family, how you see children, how you see everything that is involved in our society, you see differently maybe. That means not that if you are gay, you do it always, but you do it. But I also find it very critical, and I have a discussion about it too, that a lot of gay people or a lot of lesbians only reduce themselves on that too, and this is also a critical aspect that I have also to say. Yeah.
Okay, so you maybe this, and then Joao will have a comment, and then we close it because you have to catch up.
I have to go now already. I have to be at the airport.
Oh my.
God.
Okay.
Okay. So
yes,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll be quick. Yeah, just also in response to the whether it's kind of superficial or boring to kind of make everything about gender. I think I'm going to use an example, which maybe I'm overstepping my line, but I think race is a good way to compare it because, you have like Black feminist movement, you have Black vegan movement, and people are like, oh, but why you got to always make it about race, And it's like, this is your experience as a person, and it's very specific and different. And so gender and will always affect every aspect of your life. And for the people who it affects, it's not superficial or boring, it's your whole existence. So I think it's very valid.
Joao.
The only thing I wanted to say was in relation to sex, and maybe I was planning to talk a lot about sex later, but actually I don't think we should underestimate the sex. And I actually think one of the issues with queer thinking is that we stopped talking about sex to talk about other things that are more palatable. And one of the things about sex is actually that, okay, we may not be able to talk a lot of politics about it, but sex is in a very literal way a way of coming together, right?
Yeah, most a child one.
Like literally.
Literally and figuratively. And I think that there's a lot of potential in that. So there's a lot of politics in that, on who do you come with. And so, maybe we should talk a bit more about that as well.
Well, we will in the next panel. Yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you for participating in the show. And we'll be back in 15-20 minutes for the second part. I'm just going to put the microphone on mute. Thank you for being there and watching us.
welcome to the discussion. And I'm now first reading our text that me and Mohammed wrote together. A spectre is haunting queer communities around the world. The spectre of queer migrants and refugees. As a result, the fiction of a universal gay community is increasingly exposed to be in reality a global class system in which the queer migrants and refugees occupy a unique space. What are the characteristics of this unique space, and thus how the reality and voice of queer migrant and refugee can factor in the larger emancipatory struggles in Europe and the world? The discussion raises these questions in the larger frame set by the exhibition, Homeland for the Vagabound, which focuses on the transformation of the concepts of queer and queer identity during a time of increasing austerity, deregulation, poverty, growing racism, nationalisms, including homo-nationalism, social segregation, and discrimination. I will now ask the panelists to introduce themselves.
Sorry. Okay, so my name is Neda, and I'm a PhD student in cultural studies, and I'm also a co-editor of a Bulgarian leftist magazine called Diversia.
I'm João Florencio, and I am a lecturer in history of modern and contemporary art and visual culture at the University of Exeter in the UK.
Neda will now give us a 10-minute presentation on her.
Okay, so what I decided to write actually, like, because there are quite a lot of topics that I would like to cover in my intervention. So I'd first like to thank you for the invitation. And I'm going to read, which I hope will be still okay for you to follow because of what I just said. I would like to just kind of draw on lots of ideas and lots of things that I think might be interesting to discuss. So, like, I would like to start with a set of preliminary remarks before going on with providing you this kind of more general and contextual information. And I was asked by the organizers to speak generally about the situations of migrants and refugees in Bulgaria, which is, I think, a topic that is so vast that it can actually provide us with enough material for a couple of dissertations. But I think that, I'll still try to address the question with which I was tasked. And we'll also try to introduce some kind of questions from my perspective that might be worthwhile to discuss later. And I think for me it's quite important being in this panel to actually also stress that I'm speaking of a position of concern rather than of expertise. For like preparing for today, I actually accessed and compiled information which is available publicly. And I also sought advice from people who work more closely on this topic than I do. And I would like to thank Javor Sidorov and Raya Apostolova for being very, very generous with me and talking to me about it because they could not be here. So I also want to invite the audience to intervene if they feel that I'm missing out something or that the information that I'm presenting is not correct. As I said, I'm not speaking from a position of expertise here. And so the second remark would be that I think that one of the challenges of talking about both like migration and queerness or queer politics is that both notions have something to do with transversality, which is inherent to them. And for the context of this particular discussion, I find it important to attempt to address both the specificity of the situation of migrants in Bulgaria, but equally so to think of this situation as conditioned by and related to larger geopolitical tendencies. So in other words, to think both in situated manner and in relation to larger global flows of movement of bodies and capital. One example of this is the peripheral location of Bulgaria within the European Union. and the fact that the building of the EU-funded protective barrier on the country's border with Turkey was very much responding to pressure on Bulgaria by the Union to secure the Union's borders. This, of course, catered to homebred nationalist, racist, and xenophobic discourse propagated by spokespersons who might, on other instances, have presented themselves as Eurosceptics. But we can see here that actually there is no discrepancy between the positions of like nationalists and the interests of the European Union by, like, in this occasion of building the border. Another instance of the interrelation between local and European politics, which has a very direct impact on refugees seeking to reach Europe, are the effects on the EU-Turkey agreement, which was signed in 2016. So it postulates that so-called irregular migrants from Syria who have crossed from Turkey to Greece or Bulgaria can be returned to Turkey on the condition that for each one of them, the EU accepts a Syrian refugee currently residing in Turkey. This, in addition to the incentive of keeping their own citizens within the country, according to the annual report on the human rights in Bulgaria by the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee, is a key reason why Turkey has strengthened border control in Bulgaria, with Bulgaria. So this, in addition to alleged pushbacks, so there are many accounts of pushbacks on the border of Bulgaria with Turkey, but they are all unofficial. But we can pretty much be sure that this is happening. So the EU-Turkey agreement, in addition to those pushbacks by Bulgarian border patrol officers, has on its turn resulted in a sudden decrease of the so-called migrant flow. So if, according to the Ministry of Interior of Bulgaria statistics, in 2016, the total number of intercepted foreign migrants in Bulgaria was 18,659. In 2017, so in the next year, when we can actually measure the effects of this EU agreement with Turkey, this number dropped to 2,985, which is a decrease of 93%. So we could just say that the official and unofficial policies adopted in the past 2-3 years by EU countries are increasingly aimed at keeping refugees away from Europe. The crackdown on humanitarian search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean is one particularly harrowing example of this tendency. And another example whose irony we cannot miss today, which is the 10th of November, as we know, and we are supposed to celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall, is that European countries have, we might have seen this information actually, they have built a total amount of 1,000 kilometers of border walls since the fall of the Berlin Wall, so since 1989, which is 6 times the length of the historic Berlin Wall. All these newly built walls, including the already mentioned barrier at the Bulgarian-Turkey border, are aimed at keeping migrants away. So this puts the discussion of the situation of asylum seekers and refugees in Bulgaria into perspective. Despite the fact that numbers of asylum seekers in the country have dropped dramatically, all professionals working in the field are united in their assessment of the almost complete lack of support or so-called integrative measures for people currently in Bulgaria. So this maybe brings us a bit closer to the topic of today's discussion and of the role and conditions of the queer migrant within these processes. We can, of course, be very critical of institutional measures that are based upon an extremely rigid classification of the degree of vulnerability of different subjects, where the category of these individuals are placed within would predetermine the kind of care that they are entitled to or that they have access to. For instance, the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee mentions a recent state project where persons who are deemed part of such vulnerable groups would be granted access to legal aid at a time when their asylum procedure is still running. Yet, a glance at the State Agency for Refugee Statistics on the number of persons accommodated in reception centers and at the same time deemed to be members of such vulnerable groups for instance, unaccompanied minors or the chronically ill or pregnant women, reveals that there is no category for the specific kind of vulnerability that queer people might experience. So the queer migrant subject thus seems to be invisible or almost inexistent for the state agency for refugees or its affiliated state institutions that are supposed to address the needs of people seeking asylum in the country. This invisibility begs the question of the way in which asylum procedures, at least in terms of the way they're being run in Bulgaria, adopt, but also constitute a notion of what is political. So if much of the anti-migrant slander since the onset of the so-called crisis was directed at drawing a distinction between real, that is political refugees on the one hand, and fake, that is economic migrants on the other, then we must ask ourselves what the exclusion of sexuality means for the understanding of the political that is rendered operative in these processes. So as current campaigns against domestic violence in Bulgaria have shown, it is more often than not the case that forms of oppression that are based on gender or sexuality are more difficult to be problematized publicly. They seem to be a matter of something private, a concern of the affected individual, rather than a social and a political matter. To end these remarks, I would again like to highlight the necessity of contextualizing the question of migration within the specific context of Bulgaria. I think that it is important to consider the production of a notion of a crisis or a state of exception critically, as well as the kinds of responses that such crises require of the subject of the state, for instance. This is a process which is by no means limited to this country. I think, however, that it would be interesting to consider the particular ways in which the discursive production of a refugee crisis played itself out here, and how a predominantly nationalist, aggressive response to people seeking asylum is premised upon a set of historical erasures. So with this, I actually mean the fact that the current period of enhanced influx of migrants from foreign countries is by far not exceptional for Bulgaria's history. Pre-1989 and ever since the 1940s, Bulgaria was actively providing shelter to workers and political fighters from other socialist countries. For instance, to the family of a colleague of mine from Chile, who was persecuted by Pinochet's regime and made use of international solidarity networks to reach the Bulgarian city of Plovdiv. They resided there for 2 years in the 1970s before moving to Mozambique. This perhaps most famous, however, the perhaps most famous and large-scale reception of refugees was of the Greek ones. During the civil war in Greece, which was in the 1940s, the newly formed Bulgarian communist regime started accepting large numbers of people fleeing its southern neighbor, focusing especially on providing protection to children. In 1948, there were more than 2,300 minors who were accommodated in different facilities within the country. Up until the beginning of the 1950s, 7,000 adults had settled in Bulgaria, while for the period of 3 years between 46 and 49, 12,600 Greek refugees had passed through or resided in the country. Governmental spending to support the incoming migrants increased from 40 million levs in 47 to 150 in 49. Refugees had access to accommodation, healthcare, work rights, and pensions, while the southern mountain parts of Bulgaria provided Greek partisan fighters with the opportunity to organize and hide when necessary. If we turn to data from 1975, a year after the overturning of the military junta in Greece, there were 6,800 political refugees from Greece residing in Bulgaria, with 837 Greek children attending primary, secondary, or professional schools. In 2018, in Bulgaria, according to the official statistics by the State Agency for Refugees, there are altogether 77 refugee children in Bulgarian schools, where this number includes children from all possible incoming countries. I'm drawing this parallel for following reasons. I think it can counter historical amnesia, which is, I believe, a precondition for construing a hysteric, xenophobic, and racist discourse that we have been witnessing since the onset of the so-called refugee crisis. In a situation where transnational solidarity of oppressed subjects, workers, women, queers, migrants, is more necessary than ever, we should draw from all the resources we have to demand more just and more egalitarian policies from our governments, but also to challenge their narrative with counter-narratives of solidarity and struggle. Thank you.
I will now ask João to shortly present.
I don't have a presentation, a real presentation per se. I have a few ideas in relation to the topic, and also maybe drawing from the conversation earlier between in the previous panel. And so I think what I want to really focus on is on how I'm on a concern of mine on how queer thinking has evolved over the last maybe couple of decades, in such a way that it may have become that raises some issues that relate to the I ultimately speak to the migrant crisis and to the very polarized political positions that or seemingly polarized political positions that we have today with the rise of both I think far right politics and then the seemingly radical uptake of identity politics as primary agenda on the left, and I think so maybe just as context. So I'm currently the kind of research that I'm currently doing is looking at forms of community and kinship that may emerge in queer sex. Either anonymous sex or sex with people that we may know. But how community is negotiated and how different bodies are negotiated in kind of sexual encounters, and how that is then kind of represented in pornography. But one of the things that I find fascinating about sex, like I said earlier, is how sex involves some kind of negotiation of different bodies and some kind of coming together, like I also said earlier, of different bodies. And to me, I think mainstream queer discourses, at least since maybe the late 90s, have moved progressively away from thinking sex in order to thinking other things like identity. To me, that is a problem that will relate to the topic of the discussion here today. So what I see in contemporary queer politics is some kind of ossification or crystallization of identity positions, or of politics grounded on particular identity positions that are almost like territories that are occupied by different kinds of subjects. This type of political, I guess, strategy is actually the same that we also see on the right. So today we are inhabiting a kind of a political situation where both the right and the left speak the same language, and it's the language of identity. On the right, we often see the rise of white nationalism. On the left, we see a primary focus on
on some essential understanding of identity as the primary position from which a politics needs to or can be made or thought. So I think, as I understand queer and queerness, contemporary queer politics is at odds with what what I think is the political potential of queer. And I actually think that the migrant crisis may have something to teach queer people and queer thinking in the West. And when I say the West, maybe I may be focusing on the Anglo-American world, because a lot of the thinking on queer comes from the Anglo-American world. And what I think the migrant crisis teaches us is about forms of embodiment and subjectivity that are marked by crossing borders, by crossing territories, by either by choice or by necessity. So whilst we are increasingly trying to adopt a politics of trying to figure out who belongs where, which territories do we occupy, which identities do we occupy, which identities do we speak from, we have increasing amounts of people whose lives are marked by that crossing territories, by crossing borders, either legally or illegally. So I think the idea of movement, of transformation, is something that was at some point fundamental for our understanding of queerness, an idea of instability, of becoming, if you want, or of action, of doing, of moving. And now we see a kind of a crystallization of queer as a primarily form of identity. Whilst at the same time we're faced with the challenge of people trying to coming to our territories, to our homes, or what we understand to be our territory and our homes, and the challenges that may or may not raise. So it's a time when both the liberal left and the right and the kind of the far right politics that we see in the media every day seem to be marked by this kind of ossification or crystallization of territories, if we understand identities to be territories. The migrant crisis calls that into question and forces us to rethink, I believe, or to draws our attention to a moment where queerness was actually a lot more reticent or a lot more cautious of trying to make territorial claims about any kind of thing. And that brings me to sex, and to what I was mentioning about, a certain kind of perceived transition. So in queer academia, seems to kind of, and queer thinking seems to have moved away from thinking sex as actually something that one does as a practice of negotiation of what our body with someone else's bodies, as a practice of hospitality, a practice of communion, to focus on things that are perhaps more palatable or less controversial or less messy or less dirty, if you want. Things like identity, things that seem to be a lot more stable. So queer seems to have moved from sex to identity at the same time as mainstream politics seem to have moved from, I don't know, class struggle to identity politics, to very clear kind of politics of border protection, of cultural protection, of identity protection, of subject position, of protection of subject positions. And to me, this is counterintuitive, and it's actually quite unqueer, if I, in my way of understanding queerness. And so that connection between queerness and migration, to me, appears increasingly important to get us out of this conundrum. Because what we have today is this impossibility of actually communicating, this impossibility of coming together. Because we are speaking from positions that are enclosed upon themselves, identity positions that are closed upon themselves. So maybe I'll finish, and I hope this is making sense because I only have bullet points, but I will finish by saying that perhaps the same kind of border crossings that we see migrants doing, the same kind of border crossings that to so many people are a source of fear, to me are very similar to the kinds of border crossings that queers historically have done or have made or have been forced to make, either between, you know, family homes and kind of their new queer families, or between, you know, identities that people ascribed to them, to identities that they came to inhabit, or the borders that they crossed when they, you know, basically having sex or, you know, fucking one another. So those negotiations of territory, those negotiations of political position, that movement of forcing oneself into someone else's home, into someone else's, not forcing oneself, or of getting into someone else's home or someone else's body, if you want, and the negotiations that take place there, that kind of the almost like humility that implies from us, or that calls from us, is the same kind of humility that we see, or I think that that we can see happening in the kind of with the migrant crisis, when people are basically enacting in a kind of a spatial sense that same dynamic of border crossing, of transgression, if you want. I hope this makes sense. Yeah? Okay. And I'm happy to kind of expand on this or answer any questions.
Thanks a lot. So I would like to use your point to make a claim that I will then offer both to you as a question, and which is the position of the queer identity is often subsumed to be always a leftist position. It's like very often the right wing then uses to say it's something foreign. It's something that foreign powers want to instill on our historic values. Somebody wants to change it, and it's these foreign actors that hide behind leftist agitators. Is not in a way to make this point from a this advocatus diaboli point. Is it not also a problem of the left that it sees queer politics as a kind of territory of their own, something that is not even thought as a possibility of being contextualized as right-wing politics? If you look back in history, we see big movements like the SR in Germany, who was basically the first German gay club. I mean, sure, that is a radical stance, but I really want to only push it. It's not my position. It's just a discussion point. Is the matter of queer politics something that we can't use as in the same discussion as, oh, let's fight for the rights of cows, let's fight for against gentrification, let's fight against that and that. Because being, let's say, a vegan is a choice. being gay or lesbian is not. It is something you are, let's say, assigned at birth, and you can't choose who you are. So I offer this to Neda.
Well, can I?
What is your position on is the position of queer politics always necessarily a leftist position, or can it in some way be also seen as a universal, a non-political issue?
Well, okay, so I don't think that the left, the way I understand it, has anything to do with universals. And like also I think that the remarks that you offered on the like understanding of queer are pretty much, I pretty much share them, and they can be aligned with what, again, from my understanding, what I understand is left, because like left identity politics for me is like a bit of a paradox within itself, because like coming from a tradition where, like, let's say I'm quite influenced by Gilles Deleuze, and he has this kind of very nice, very short interview, like with which he talks about what is the left, and then he talks about the left as this kind of horizon, and like the necessity of starting from the limit, or like from the minority. So like the left can, like the way I understand it, doesn't have anything to do with preset identities, with preset territories, if we say, like, if we use what you were kind of talking about, or it cannot, it's like it's a line of transversality. It's like something that cuts across identities. So like there are no like preset, like there is not a queerness that one or like someone else can claim for themselves, at least from my understanding. I'm not I'm just talking as from position of, as I said, concern, but it's like I don't think that like neither left nor queer can be appropriated that easily and like reduced to some identitarian position. And there is something stubborn and something kind of unassimilatable within both notions that I think will always try to escape and always try to cross borders or territories, or the attempt to somehow maintain and tame it.
I mean, I think I absolutely agree with that, and I really like. I also have a very nice crush on Deleuze. I used to, maybe not so much, but he's very dear. His work was very important to me too, and I like the idea of horizon, both for the left as horizon, but also queer as horizon, and I think very much like you said, that goes beyond any attempt at containing what both things may be. And I think the problem with institutionalized left politics and the problem with institutionalized queer politics is that they don't see themselves as horizons; they see themselves as territories. As forms of belonging based on some kind of shared tangibles, and perhaps the issue perhaps is, and I think your disappointment with the left, if I may kind of try to read what your disappointment with the left is, may not be a disappointment with the left. It may be a disappointment with the institutionalized left, or at least the mainstream left discourse that we see kind of playing around, or so-called left discourse that we see played around in the media every day, and that kind of ossification or territorialization of both, either the left or queer, will be the death of both, right? Because I mean, there's that beautiful book that José Muñoz wrote, Cruising Utopia, about queerness as horizon and queerness as ecstasy. Actually, queerness as kind of a mode of escape from the quagmire of the present, as he writes. And
You know, the moment we associate queer with anyone's identity, the moment we associate the left with anyone's identity or any present state of affairs, we are no longer projecting this horizon as a sense of possibility. We are kind of playing, we are not kind of extracting ourselves or becoming transversal, like you said. And I think that's the potential in queer. That's the kind of the potential, that potential to transgress borders, to cross them. That to me is really important, and that's what identity takes away from it. As soon as you say, "Oh," so queer not as something that we are, but queer as something that we are constantly kind of doing in whichever way, and could be a right way or a left way. But you know, as soon as we talk left or right politics, we already have a kind of a territory there. We know what it is, and we're kind of playing with it. I think queerness is a way that we can actually kind of shoot. There's lots of sexual metaphors here that we can shoot elsewhere, you know, shoot in a different direction.
Use this directional notion to queerness or gayness or lesbianness has often been described in Hegelian notions like yes or no, gay or not. Well, Deleuze, who you just brought up with his Mille Plateau, is maybe the best philosopher to use as a counter-current against this Hegelian notion of no, I'm not gay, I'm not, I'm completely straight. To build a notion of impossible calculations, of notion of I cannot even calculate my own sexual trajectory. I cannot even calculate that. I can calculate yes or no. It's a basic cybernetic notion. But so maybe we should proceed from a cybernetic notion of sexuality to a post-cybernetic notion that goes beyond the margins of binary thought. But I again ask you a difficult question. How could that be possible? And if can't find an answer, I'll be happy with any result.
Maybe you want to answer.
Well, for me, or do you want
you go first. I don't know what to say.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand correctly your question, but it's also a matter of like you're talking about like this kind of superimposition of like a frame of interpretation or of thinking of sex and sexuality. But like what I think is happening on the ground is that you cannot impose this kind of binary thinking. Like it's already like, I mean, it's so unruly and so like kind of uncategorizable that I don't think that like, I'm not sure whether it's, yeah, I'm not sure what are the stakes even involved in like moving away from one thinking to the other in terms of like a conception of sexuality when there is already something quite raw and like big, I don't know.
Maybe I can interject. No, you don't have to turn it to me. The migrant aspect of this question is, and it comes through sort of like empirical observation, is that often the very same queer migrant, right? Especially when they're dealing with their migrant community or family, actually has to escape this very binary that's allowing them to sort of like qualify for this identity, right? So they're the most uncomfortable with this because for them, they come from a place where this binary, at least as a political category, doesn't really exist. Yeah. And also, this binary has endangered their life to the point that they're left, right? And also, as they're getting introduced, for them, this non-cybernetic sexuality is they're much more at ease with it. And then confronted with Western frame, they feel guilty of quote unquote not coming out or not identifying, right? But then they have to identify in order to actually qualify.
They are interpolated to make a choice, right? Are you or are you not?
Mm-hmm.
Do you qualify or do you not qualify for our help, for our asylum, for whatever? And this is both kind of an epistemological thing, but it's also it forces you into into making a choice or of having to take to inhabit one of these territories rather than living on the border, and that's the least unqueer thing to do. You know, if you can, like, that space of the border is actually maybe more interesting than whatever lies on either side.
So the reason I brought it up was also like related to your point earlier. That is like this crossing or this journey is actually double for the queer migrant, because it's not only a geographic journey, but it's a journey to this forced fixed identity from the fluidity that, whether good or bad, they had while they were back home, when their so-called queer being was not so binarized or pigeonholed. So this move to the West is itself a return to some kind of fixed territory.
And there is, and I mean, I don't work with queer migrants, but I know many people that do, and there's often in the UK, every once in a while, stories come up in the papers about the process that an LGBT asylum seeker has to go through in order to be granted asylum, in the very clear criteria that will prove whether or not you are actually queer. So friends of mine, activists, friends of mine who work with migrants, this language of the questionnaire in the interview is totally alien to them. So they have to be educated on this grammar that is not just a grammar of you know, something that they can. It's not just a grammar that they can use to describe their life. It's a grammar that they then have to inhabit with their own bodies and with their own desire and with their own in order to qualify. And there's lots of people that just prepare these migrants so that they can actually know what to say, because they don't. Often the questions are not understandable to them. So this is what you need to say, because you need to say that, you know, you need to tick these boxes because you are queer, and the exercise is, I mean, I can only imagine how splitting of yourself it is, and how violent it is in so many levels, because it forces you into that binary or into those categories. It actually unqueers you in a weird way.
And you cannot be binary if you are queer and you are a migrant, and then you might be coming from a certain caste, or if you're a worker, if you're rich. There are so many trajectories already implemented in the human being that just using a binary notion to define somebody is linear politics is not going to work here. It's just that linear politics leads to identity politics in a way, because identity politics is always going to be offer itself as a possibility for co-option. It's always, and that's what I meant with this dialectic notion, this Hegelian notion, and how we can form a politics of non-dialectics, of post-dialectical, not even trialectical, because then we always get like seeing everything in Kantian diagrams. I'm really like interested in, do you see possibilities and existing political models that already give us a blueprint of that? I mean, I think of the popular movement in Pinochet, before Pinochet. There are Kurdish resistance against ISIS, where it's very multi-layered. Is there some queer hidden history that we can find and redevelop for the now? So
I think you said something really, the word earlier that I think goes in that direction. You said stubbornness, and I think that's quite something that's quite stubborn about queerness. In that you know, when you asked to take a position, you say, actually, I don't want to. That moment of almost attempting to extract yourself or postpone or defer, of being stubborn, of being annoying, of being a killjoy, like Sarah Ahmed says.
But yeah, okay. I mean, it's theoretically, intellectually, and politically. I do like. I think great. We should inhabit the border zones. We should be killjoys. But like with Sarah Ahmed, I mean, like she does have a. Where is she, in Oxford or Cambridge right now? She's someone like who can afford to be in this
I've had that conversation.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know. Like there is a difference whether like I have a like strong skepticism towards like kind of fetishizing the queer, like this kind of border lingering subject as well. While I think it's very, very important that we assert and like we fight for the possibility of like these borders becoming more inhabitable, then at the same time we should equally so try to, not necessarily, it shouldn't be, we should make also like other strata of the political more inhabitable as well, because otherwise I'm not sure. Because it's easy for me to say, inhabit the border, or like embrace your.
The movement is also a privilege to being a killjoy is also a privilege. If you mention.
I also wanted to talk about like how the category, the abstract category of queer migrant itself in reality can at least be divided into two. One category are migrants who happen to be queer, and say, for instance, in the last 5-6 years, you have a lot of people from war-torn areas in Syria that they already qualify to be a quote-unquote UN refugee or like a status refugee because of war, and they just happen to be queer. And then we deal with the category of queer migrant whose asylum is wholly based on being queer. It's not based on any other condition that has driven them away from home except being queer, right? And you totally see the different ways in which they feel in the whole society, the way they're accepted, the way they're dealt with is completely almost different. Because what you have with, and this is based on research and observation, right? When you're dealing with people from war-torn area who do not have to argue about their identity, they're more ambivalent. And they participate more based on choice. And their identity is much more fluid because they did not have to argue it in the court. They did not have to play it. They did not have to check boxes. But also, some of them are more in need of support because actually now that they're enjoying this freedom, they become in complete contrast with a host community of their own. So they become sort of like they become isolated because now they weren't quote unquote queer. They were just a war quote unquote refugee. But now they're in the West, they're exercising the freedom. So then the community realizes that, oh my God, this person's gay, and then immediately they're isolated from the cousins, from the family, from the friends, and they need a particular type of support. Whereas someone who comes in as, you know, I mean, the category of I'm a refugee because I'm a sexual minority refugee has a totally different trajectory. And you know, so it's just, I'm not saying it as a question, but I just thought it really needs to be discussed because it's really like, it's not like even within the category of queer migrant, you're dealing with like different types of queer migrants with different kind of issues and different needs when it gets to the whole society.
I mean, yeah, I think that again the case with the UK and the process to register as, to qualify as an LGBT migrant, I think has a very tangible impact on the life that you will live institutionally after that. And again, one of the typical things that happens in those scenarios, or that happens a lot, is when you have men mostly coming and then talking to whoever these border office people are about their friends back home, their friend back home, and one of the things that my friends that work with them do is that you cannot say my friend. You need to say your boyfriend. Like, my boyfriend, he's my friend, and just that transition. That, I mean, it's immediately, it's passing you through a sieve of how queerness ought to be embodied in order to become visible and tangible and grant you some degree of security. But we see that a lot, that conversation about it's not your friend, it's your boyfriend, it's your wife, or it's your husband, or you cannot just say your friend, because if you say it's your friend, even if you say it's your special friend, you're gonna go back home. And I think that, to me, that seems really simple in some level, but it's an exercise of extreme violence. I think that is, yeah.
The way I relate my comment to what you are bringing up, Neda, is that it is absolutely, it's because of the historical amnesia almost that we need this category. Because if say, for instance, I mean, your statistics were about Bulgaria, right? Mm-hmm. But if the world had not forgotten how they dealt with political refugees or other forms of migrants or refugees in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you didn't have to put your sexual life on the line in order to qualify. You understand what I'm saying? Because society will already be open enough to say, okay, it's somebody who's escaping some kind of like hardship, and we accept them. But it actually shows you the closing of the gate that forces people to actually say, okay, you know what I mean? If my sexual life will get me a paper, I'm willing to declare it. I'm willing to put myself in that box to get this. It's very unfortunate, actually, that someone has to do that. You know, it's not. Some people look at it as privilege, especially like you hear that from like non-queer refugees. I wish I was queer. I would have such an easier time passing this goddamn thing. Sometimes you actually get non-queer people to tell that someone who's queer to tell that person is my boyfriend, even though they're not. They're willing to pay money in order to qualify for this category, because it's almost becoming one of the only ways in which you can migrate, right? But this is all part of this amnesia that you were talking about, because if the West remembers how they dealt with like the refugees of the communist era, or you know, I mean, or the refugees in repression in places like Chile, where like a lot of Chileans moved out of Chile after the coup d'etat and all that, it will be a much easier time for this, and people did not have to put their sexuality on the paper.
Yeah,
bureaucratize their sexuality in order to qualify for residency. Yeah.
I guess there is still quite a big difference between how this plays out in countries like the UK, maybe Italy and Germany. I don't know which other countries.
Canada and the United States.
And like then also in Bulgaria, because I think Stani, you said that you found out that there was one person who was granted asylum on the basis of their sexuality, just one. So it's like in Bulgaria. So it's yeah.
Yeah, I just want to mention that we have just one that was granted refugee status. And then I know of another case. It's very difficult. It's very interesting because when he was dealing with some of the people working in the institution and he was trying to claim himself as someone who's gay, they're like, but you don't look gay, so this is another way that you're policed. Even if you say all the right things, you're still being like put in this category of how
how to be gay.
Well, then we do have
one such case of like someone being granted a refugee status because
they look gay.
No, it's not only that they look gay, but they were gay. Yeah.
So it's like we need to do like a starter kit for looking gay to qualify. But the memes, we need to do memes.
Memes. Another thing that now you also, and I'm just talking about the UK because it's where I live. But another thing that they need these people who want to prove or to ask for asylum on the basis of the sexuality or gender identity, they have to show that they have been seeing recognized agencies or charities. So a friend of mine works for an HIV charity that deals a lot with South Asian communities in the UK, and they constantly have to write letters of recommendation to the border office or whoever, or the foreign office, I don't even know, immigration services, whoever they are, to say that this person has been is genuinely gay, or because they have been coming to our services for I don't know how many weeks or months. So it's literally a letter of recommendation, as you do for a job. It's a letter of recommendation for being welcomed into the UK gay intelligentsia.
Unbelievable.
I have a next position. So we often hear from homophobic societies, and we often hear talk about or read and listen and about let's say a certain populace that is homophobic, and the first thing is then how can we help them, or how we can help these refugees, how we can help the queer populace, when in reality, or at least a lot of the core issue is not that people are inherently homophobic, but if you are from a family that is poor or near poverty, and you rely, let's say we are a farmer society, we have all over the world. Farmers we have everywhere. So we have a farmer society who relies that the offspring creates children so you can live healthily when you're in old age. And in such an economic situation, getting a child that is homosexual, that is queer, might be an extreme economic problem that we, as the West, don't even talk about. These are all homophobes. Here, like all these evil Iraqis, these evil Palestinians, these evil whatevers, these evil Swedes in 1200s. They are homophobic, but we don't see the economic impact a society can have upon this on the view of sexualities, and that a West that uses the quote-unquote third world as a cheap labor force or a cheap way to get expensive resources is actually creating, through its economic measures, the very homophobia it then declares as outrageous and barbaric, when it's actually a gigantic facilitator, not the only one, but it's still a gigantic facilitator of that. So,
well, but I don't know, like you're kind of reducing like this reproduction to labor force and like to the capacity to actually kind of produce for an economy, which there is not really a, like you wouldn't, like even from an economic perspective, which in this case is quite, has like almost fascist, I would say, repercussions if we actually adopted it. Mm-hmm. I think that even from this perspective, like we cannot say that like queer or like gay people who are not like reproducing, they're not contributing to the economy, or like they're not with their workforce, they do work. No,
no,
like, so
I'm sorry,
like,
but I'm not.
We are
my position.
like, but we are like we're overpopulated. So if this was actually a problem, like even like from
the queer
far,
the world,
like we wouldn't have the kind of problem like the worldwide problem with overpopulation, right? There've always been gay people, right? So you wouldn't say that it's like it's a breaking point, because you gave this example with the farmers' society where not having kids would be a huge economic problem, right?
Yeah.
No?
I have a different position. I have a position that is related, not different from different from it, slightly different from yours, which is that so this it goes back to the things that reducing politics to identity politics, the things that become obfuscated by that, and I think it makes it's beneficial for a lot of people if people who are underprivileged, you said farmers, but you know I can think about urban working classes in London, or I can think about you know who have been beaten to bits over decades and decades of conservative economic politics and policies. It's very easy to then turn them into homophobes if we portray the middle class gay man as the enemy that comes and gentrifies your neighborhoods and you know brings all the nice coffee shops and steals the kids, you know. But I think it's very easy to make your enemies an identity rather than an economic system or a political system. As long as you blame people, you're not looking at the structure that causes that inequality. So, you know, young Pakistani kids in East London gay bash the gay men that go out on the weekends because they see them as basically responsible for taking over their neighborhoods and increasing rent prices and closing the shops that they went to, and you know, and white working class kids feel the same, and it's actually very easy to not talk about class or not talk about the economy and just talk about, you know, it's the gays or just make it an identity issue.
In the same sense, I think, just not to fully back Patrick's proposition, but often homosexuality or queerness in migrant communities or societies which contribute to the migrant increase the first question that comes to the mind of the family is the lack of children. Whether it's for sheer labor or for residual ideas that like I have kids so the kids have kids, and if my kids are not going to have kids, there's going to be a catastrophe. It's often when you talk to people who are dealing with this, and I say that again out of my own experience, out of my own being myself from one of those places, is that the first concern of family and community is the fact that, oh my God, you're not going to have children. That's a disaster. And often people who remain in the closet, live a double life in the West or back home, are doing it because their parents expect them to have children. But it's not always necessary for the labor. But it's just for the idea that my lineage has to continue on. Or like this idea that like in the past it was really part of the economy, but now it's just this residual that the culture has not dealt with. So like say, okay, having kids is not important anymore.
You know, but that's my same background. That's my same background. And one of the things when I came out to my parents years ago, one of the things that my mom told me was, you know, who's going to look after you when you grow old? Because I would not have children. So it's that same kind of logic, of kind of lineage and that.
I see you have a question.
Yeah, question, comment. I think it's a really interesting thing that you brought up, and I think it's also is a more generally also a feminist issue, because in a lot of these places you don't need to be gay to not be able to have children, you know, and a lot of I think you have like this intersectional problem of gay women who are, you know, often, you know, there's the expectation of starting a family, and you have this eugenics of abortions of little girls just because they're born girls in some countries, and because it's also an economic expectation that they will be, you know, dowry and all these things, and especially if you grow up and you don't want to be married and you don't want to be married with men or anyone, then it gets even more complicated. And I thought it was really interesting about the perspective of if you don't kind of critique the hyper-consumption of our Western society, then you are in a way perpetuating this kind of economic model and social model and the family model that like the entire economy depends on.
Did you have another?
Yeah, I just want to add up to that, like just a little observation that they have is like also there's some queer people that they are already in like this coupledom or they got married, but also, for example, if they want to have access to all the not institutions but the facilities that would give them access to, you know, having children, this is also a huge economic issue, because like a lot of them are like mostly middle class and can afford it. But I've thought a lot, and for example here if you're like lower class, working class, queer people that, you know, want to have children, like you don't really have access to those services even if you want to. So I was just thinking that this is another way that, like, you know, sexuality and class intersect.
So what is the situation of gay adoption in Bulgaria?
You cannot have it. Like gay marriage is not recognized even if it was concluded abroad. And I know of some couples that were like women, because for men it's like totally it's unthinkable to even have a child here. Like women can either adopt or they can go and have like this artificial insemination thing, but they need to do it with their own resources because the state wouldn't grant it because they don't recognize your marriage, and I guess even if they did, they wouldn't.
But men cannot.
Men cannot, absolutely cannot, because it's very difficult for a single male parent to adopt a child, and surrogacy is not really allowed in Bulgaria, so male couples wouldn't be able to do that. And of course, like civil unions and marriages are not recognized here, so this is pretty much unthinkable.
They will have to eventually because of EU. No, what do you think it's not going to happen?
I'm not
soon?
sure, because like, for example, okay, now we can, like, we're going a bit into this category of marriage, but like, now we have this case of like women who have concluded their marriage in UK, and they're trying to get their marriage recognized here, but I guess it's going to take like a long time. So yeah, I don't know. It's a very difficult climate and situation here. So maybe at some point.
So since
One more question.
we have another question.
Yeah. If you want to come to the front so we can record your voice. Okay, I don't speak. About immigration. The lady said the world is overpopulated. But the world is overpopulated, you said. It's quite right. But the problem is going on. And we speak about regulation. But how to stop this process? What do you say about this? And the matter is, if you take one country, Ethiopia, for example, Ethiopia, in fact, most countries sent. In 1965, the population was 22 million people. 22 million. In 2016, the population is 105 million people. For 60 years, 500 increased. But you see Russia, its population 150 million people. 150. But Russia has huge territory, natural resources. But Ethiopia 105. And if you see other countries, African countries, you see the same. And the European Union gives humanitarian food help, assistance to these countries. But in this way, when you have for 1 million, for one woman, 6 children, 6 children, you will be hungry always there in Africa. Always. And you will not have job. Always. So, but what is the decision? European Union.
Maybe move more people from Ethiopia to Russia. There is a lot of space there.
It's very cold.
It's too cold, maybe. No, I don't know. It's still yeah.
Every country must supply the population with all food. Because if you don't stop this region,
I think I go for your solution. We were talking about it in terms of Bulgaria too, right? Like
Bulgaria. Yes.
So closer to your voice.
First to ask, did I miss the art?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. But anyway, I have a question to ask about immigration as well. So, personally, I think that people usually do not as they just say, not necessarily belong to the place they were born. And because different places are attractive
to different people in a different way, and so on and so on. But there is this, apart from any political and economic factors, just the devastating, kind of devastating climate change that could, not just could, but will for sure lead to huge increase of migrant processes. As I'm an artist, but I'm not that professional. Looking at in a geopolitical view, this process will be mostly for sure carried to Europe. Like those people will settle in Europe, as it is the closest place, as it is the most attractive place to live. Because we know for sure they will not just swim across the ocean to go to US. They will go to Europe for sure. And this is a huge migration process that is not into the distant future, just it is coming up on us. And I'm talking about billions of people, straight people. This amount of people, billions of people. How do you think this is probably, how do you think going to affect you?
I don't know.
So it's a question about potentialities.
No, it's not necessarily.
I don't know. I think, like, from my perspective, we should really like start, like, because yeah, of course this will happen, and this is, I'm sure it's already happening. But it's like we know why this is the case, because we know that the global north is the place where like the global like kind of climate change has like been mostly contributed to and accelerated. So it's like it's not a like it's like that's the, I don't know, the absurdity and the injustice in this, that like people in countries that have mostly contributed less to the climate change will suffer very quickly and very much from this. But I don't know, maybe sounds a bit utopic, but I do think that we should just abandon the whole notion of nationality and like territories and just like I don't know, we shouldn't, like, there is nothing dear and nothing worthy and I don't know, like precious about it to hold on to. Like, I don't know, it's
but I think the question is also then, I think
so
maybe what you also pointing at, then there is also then beyond the idea of territories and nationality, that I agree with what you said, but there is also an issue of tangible space. So you know, if you are the Tesla guy, you go on, maybe we'll kind of try to build on Mars. So there are very practical issues and so I don't know what the answer to those are.
There are doomsday theorists who actually think the rise of the right, whether intentionally or intentionally, is a way of global north preparing for that, by rather than saying we should be anti-immigration because of climate change, because then it will commit them to climate change. They are actually using all sorts of nationalistic rhetoric, dragging things skeuomorphically from the past in order to actually deal, like, it's actually the way to deal with this, is that they're setting up these borders actually not against like invasion of their identity, but against what's about to happen as a result of climate change. So left has to be fully aware of that and enter this debate very much like prepared for all sorts of ways in which to whether we want to promote some kind of like global citizenship, whether you want whatever we want to do in relation to both climate change and mass migration. We really have to play our cards really well and really smart, because they are totally playing it smart.
But the reality is that the space is not.
There's just no time to just turn off the light in the bathroom when you're not there. There's just no time to leave your car and walk. There's just no time for this because it's like time.
It's happening, but you know what I mean? I'd rather not think it's too late, because if that's the case, then I don't know what to do. I think it's never too late for some kind of a measure. Of course, it's too late for an ideal measure, but it's never too late to do something. It's too late to do the best, but maybe it's not too late to do something, and something needs to get done. Can we close it on this note?
I think that would be a good close.
Like almost like an hour ahead of our schedule. But maybe there's one last comment. Maybe you should get that.
Oh no, I was going to ask about homo nationalism, so that's another topic that maybe we can save.
So thanks everybody, thanks to the listeners, thanks to the presenters, and thanks to the audience.
Sorry?